Hey, welcome everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Zoltán and I'm a researcher here in MEI working on now on transnational networks between Southeast Asia and the Middle East. And actually my specialization includes Kuwait and the Islamic scene of Kuwait and their transnational relations to Indonesia, Cambodia. Currently I'm focusing on actually the links to Cambodia, but I'll talk about this later. So today I will talk about quite large topic and also quite under-researched topic, which is the linkages between the Middle East and Southeast Asia, these linkages include economy, tourism, trade, charities, and of course religion. I mean, perhaps you have been in Kuala Lumpur, and you can see that there are many Gulf Arabs can be spotted on the streets of, especially in the center of the city. Also, many students study at Malaysian universities from the Gulf. The number is increasing since, especially since 9/11, because of the imposed visa restrictions. But actually, during this talk, after giving a very short historical glimpse, I will focus mostly on religious links between the Gulf and Southeast Asia, and also I'll speak about a part of my current research, which is the dynamics and activities of Kuwaiti Islamic charities among the Cambodian Muslim minority communities. So let's start with just in a few words. Let me give you an introduction of the historical development of these Middle East and Southeast Asia connections. So connections actually between the two regions exist since like the ancient ages, but these, especially trade links, intensified in the middle of the 16th century. This is because of a number of historical developments. The first one is the Ottomans' conquest of Yemen, South Arabia. You can see here. So in the middle of the 16th century, actually the Ottoman Empire, you can see the territory of the empire on this map, reached its golden age. And so the Ottomans intended to, by this conquest, intended to first protect the Hijaz, the holy cities Mecca and Medina, and at the same time counter the Portuguese, who also appeared in Oman and in East Africa, in order to secure the Ottoman trade interests in the Indian Ocean. So after actually securing the Red Sea and access to the Indian Ocean, shipping between the Middle East and the larger Asia became smoother, easier, less dangerous. And at the same time, European powers appeared, as I mentioned, the Portuguese and then the Dutch. Now the Dutch, it's very important, the Dutch East India Company established shipping services between the Southeast Asian region, Malaya, the archipelago, which is now mostly Indonesia, and different parts of the world, including Persia and the Arabian Gulf. Here is, oops, what did I do? All right. So you can see here a map the trade routes of the Dutch East India Company. So actually it reached from Batavia, which is now Jakarta, until the Persian Empire and also the eastern coast of Arabia. And of course, on these ships, many kind of people were traveling, including also many from the Middle East. For instance, among these were in the upcoming centuries the traders from Yemen, especially from Hadramaut, whose ancestors, who can be so the Hadrami communities until today can be found in Malaysia, Indonesia, also in Singapore. And with the expansion of the trade links, religious links also were established and intensified. For example, more people could perform the Hajj by using the Dutch and later the British ships to travel from the archipelago and Southeast Asia to the Arabian Peninsula. And many of these Hajjis stayed years, decades, or even a lifetime in the holy cities, bringing back traditions, schools of thought, knowledge to their home regions. And actually, until today, Middle Eastern ideas have been influencing Islam in Southeast Asia. But actually, I would like to jump from here to the very contemporary history of these linkages. And this is, well, arguably the states of the Arabian Gulf has the most extensive presence in Southeast Asia, including Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and the Emirates. And the history of establishing these relationships and especially the religious networks goes back to the 1979 Iranian Revolution. As you know, in 1979, the Iranian monarch was overthrown and the government in Tehran became an Islamist government influenced by Shia Islam. And the government in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, and also in other Gulf countries perceived this new regime in Tehran as an existential threat. So they actually intended to counter the Iranian expansion of what they perceived as the Iranian expansion of the revolution to other parts of the world by kind of counter-propaganda, by establishing presence, trying to establish a more cohesive, more closer pan-Islamic solidarity in the Sunni world. So within the framework of this, the Saudis especially established a number of international organizations, including the Muslim League or the International Islamic Relief Organization of Saudi Arabia, or the World Muslim Youth. At the same time, a number of faith-based charities, Islamic charities, were established in the Gulf countries. Well, these charities were nominally independent, but they had many linkages, myriad of linkages to the ruling families of the Gulf. For example, one of these is the Haramain organization, which had a quite important role in Southeast Asia until it was closed down by the Saudi government due to American pressure. they were accused of supporting terrorism. So they basically banned this organization in 2004. Another important entity for our subject is the International Islamic, so the Islamic University of Medina. Actually, the university itself was established in I think it's 1961, but after 1979, the university's infrastructure was considerably expanded to be able to accommodate more international students. You can see a picture actually on, well, this is the only one I found on the university online. And so the Saudis provided, well, thousands of scholarships around the world to those who want to pursue religious sciences and want to become religious specialists. And after finishing their studies, these graduates returned to their home countries, and many of them became missionaries, spreading a kind of Islam influenced by the religious discourses prevalent in the Gulf, especially Salafism. I'll talk about this later as well. At the same time, Saudi cultural missions were established. Many migrant workers from Southeast Asia reached the countries of the peninsula. They were also, many of them were also influenced by the more Puritan, more text-based religious discourses in these countries. At the same time, the states, the GCC states, were supporting a number of various Islamic movements in Malaysia, Indonesia, and other Southeast Asian countries. Also, they hoped that their soft power, their presence is going to grow if these movements become more influential. For example, perhaps many of you are familiar with PAS. The PAN is, what's the exact name of PAS? Party. So yeah, so this is the main Malaysian, one of the main Malaysian Islamist movements and parties, and they, since decades, they rule, for example, the northeastern state of Kelantan. Their first electoral campaign, for example, was financed by a Kuwaiti charity organization, which is called the Social Reform Society. So it shows actually the dynamics of how these networks are actually expanding to the region. And also, so Gulf capital helped, financial capital helped to establish a number of religious institutions, a number of religious educational institutions in the region. For example, you can see on this picture the International Islamic University of Malaysia in the state of Selangor. This is perhaps the biggest one in Southeast Asia, or the Yala Islamic University in South Thailand. Now, both of these universities are kind of transnational melting pots. Besides Southeast Asian students, there are many Africans studying, for example, in Malaysia, in Selangor. At the same time, a large number of the lecturers at this university are coming from the Middle East, especially from Egypt, Syria, Sudan, but also there are some from the Gulf. The Yala Islamic University is a very important hub, especially of the networks of the Salafi movement, a more text-based Puritan movement. Many Cambodian Muslim students, for example, study at this university, bring back knowledge to Cambodia and influence the Islamic discourse of the local minorities. I'll also talk about this later. So it is no wonder that one of the main targets of Gulf-based religious proselytization and the expansion of Gulf-based religious networks was the largest Muslim country, not only in Southeast Asia but in the world, Indonesia. And actually, the expansion of the Islamic networks from the Arabian Gulf coincided with the opening of the Indonesian regimes, to the Islamization of the public sphere, or allowing more Islam in the Indonesian public sphere, because first the government saw piety as an antidote to Marxism. Perhaps you know that in the 1960s there have been a major, I don't know how to put it in a politically correct way, a major conflict in Indonesia, which involved the purging of the country from the cadres of the Communist Party. At the same time, a pious middle class emerged due to the expansion of education, of literacy. More people were able to access religious texts, religious knowledge. Many of them previously traveled to the Middle East, studied in the Middle East. So this pious middle class also had a kind of need to allow more religious discourses in the Indonesian public sphere. They were also receptive to the ideas coming from the Arabian Gulf. So many of them received scholarships from the Saudi government to study in Medina, in the Islamic University of Medina. Also, they went to study in Al-Azhar in Egypt. At the same time, a number of Islamic charities, Islamic organizations appeared in the country. For example, the Dewan Dakwah Islamiyah, which is a kind of like mediator of Muslim charities, especially Gulf charities. So let's say beneficiaries or someone who wants to establish a local charity organization and needs funds from the Gulf, they can approach this institution and they link them to potential donors in the Gulf countries. Another major institution is LIPIA, is Lembaga, Ilmu Pengetahuan Islam dan Bahasa Arab, which translates to so it's like Lembaga is department in Malay, but I think it's not a very accurate translation. But let's say it's like department of Islamic, Indonesian Islamic and Islamic knowledge and Arabic language. And this is the local Indonesian branch of the Qura University, which is based in Mecca, and the language of the study at this university is exclusively Arabic. The message what this university convey is significantly more puritanical, more text-based than what the Indonesian Islamic milieu is. So for this reason, it has been a kind of nurturing institution of the cadres of various Islamic movements, the Muslim Brotherhood and Salafism in the country. And of course, with the appearance of Gulf charities and Gulf institutions in the country, new movements emerged, such as I mentioned, the Muslim Brotherhood and Salafism. And another wave of the influx of Gulf charities and institutions was the 2004 tsunami, which of course, which destroyed Banda Aceh and many other places in the country. So under the pretext of helping Muslims in Indonesia, several Gulf charities, several new Gulf charities appeared in the country, and then from Aceh, they spread to other parts of the country. But let me move from here to actually to my own research a little bit through my experiences, through my case study. I'll try to highlight how these transnational networks actually work, how do they build up and establish influence in a certain locality. So in the remaining part of this lecture, I will talk about a little bit about the transformations of Islam in Cambodia, and I'll examine how it made possible for Gulf-based NGOs to set a foothold in the country and to spread their ideas and in a way transform the Cambodian Islamic setting. And I also would like to talk a little bit about why these Muslim charities do what they are doing. Why is it worth for the Gulf governments, especially in our case, the Kuwaiti government, to support, to allow these charities to establish presence in Southeast Asia. And then I will talk a little bit about the activities of one specific Kuwaiti charity, the Society for the Revival of Islamic Heritage in Cambodia. So, all right. This is a map of Cambodia, and well, the Muslim community in Cambodia is quite small. It's about 4 to 6% of the country, which means about 600,000 to 1 million people. 75% of these Muslims are ethnically Cham. Cham is an Austronesian language group, so their language is related to the Malay. And 25% is so-called Chwea. Chwea is coming from the word Java, but it doesn't necessarily signify the island of Java, which is part of Indonesia now. But Jawi is more of a designation of someone who is or something which is coming from the Malayan Peninsula and the Malayan archipelago. So these people now are their language is now Khmer, but their ancestry is most probably from somewhere from the Riau, from the peninsula, or from South Thailand. Also, the vast majority of Cambodian Muslims follow the Shafi'i legal school, Shafi'i Madhab, same which is the dominant one in Malaysia and Indonesia. And you have a very small minority of non-Sunni Muslims, who are called Chambani. They are regarded as a syncretic community, so influenced by Buddhism, local Khmer, and also local Vietnamese culture. So they are not receptive of any kind of Gulf influence or Gulf aid. So in the remaining, or in the following, we are going to talk about the Sunni Muslims of Cambodia. Actually, these, you can see the major areas where Muslims live in the country. So one is close to the capital, Phnom Penh, then which is the former Kampong Cham province, which is now Tebung Mum and Kampong Cham, and also some here in the middle of the country, some in the south at the coast, especially in Kampot. Now, also let me give you just a very short historical background of the Cambodian Muslims. Now, in recent history, as you know, that Cambodia between 1975 and 1979 went through quite turbulent events. The Khmer Rouge regime murdered, well, hundreds of thousands or even more than 1 million people in Cambodia. It's not possible to know how many. It is debated whether the Khmer Rouge targeted the Muslim communities or not. Some argue that they actually wanted to get rid of the non-Khmer population altogether. Some say that the reason why so many Muslims died is basically linked to their religious observance, which was something not accepted by this communist regime. What's important is that the entire Muslim, or almost the entire Muslim religious elite, so religious specialists, scholars, was wiped out, killed. Almost the entire Muslim religious infrastructure was destroyed, so all the mosques, all the Islamic educational institutions, so-called pondoks, were gone. So when actually the Vietnamese in 1979 invaded the country and liberated most of Cambodia's territory from the Khmer Rouge, the Muslims basically had to start from year zero to build up their schools, their mosques, etc. So first, the Muslims from the Mekong Delta, from Vietnam, provided aid, for instance, copies of the Quran to Cambodian Muslims to restart their religious infrastructure. But actually, a kind of Cambodian Muslim revival happened after 1991, when the United Nations Transitional Authority took over the country from the from the government supported by the Vietnamese regime. And 1993, the Cambodian monarchy also was restored. So when the UNTAC, the United Nations Transitional Authority, took over the country, a number of, like, thousands of NGOs actually from the West, but also from other parts of the world, came to Cambodia to help in rebuilding the country. And among these were a number of Islamic NGOs, especially from Malaysia, but also charity organizations from the Gulf, from Saudi, Qatar, the Emirates, and Kuwait appeared. And they intended to help the Muslim community to improve both their living standard, but at the same time rebuild their educational infrastructure, their mosques. And also with these NGOs, modern Islamic movements appeared in the country. Among these were the Tabligh Jamaat, which is a kind of proselytizing movement, was established in the colonial India, but now it grew as a global network. Many of the Malaysian NGOs are linked to the Tabligh. And the second most important movement among these is Salafism. So actually, I don't know how many of you have heard about Salafism. What is this? If any of you, please just raise your hands. Yes? So, and could you tell me just what you heard about it? Just to...
Sorry, there is one
just the name.
strong movement that is supported by a lot of middle class members in Indonesia.
Yeah, that's true.
That's all I know.
Yeah, okay, so it is a puritanical movement. They tell that they intend to purify Islam, return to the original Islam, the way it was practiced during the lifetime of the Prophet and the companions of the Prophet, so the first generations of Muslims in the 7th century. And they intend to achieve this by a kind of literal reading of Islam's foundational texts, which is the Quran and the prophetic tradition, the deeds and sayings of the Prophet. And they intend to erase the centuries-long, many parts of the centuries-long Islamic intellectual tradition. So, I mean, you can, for example, Salafis, unfortunately I didn't put a picture about one of the Salafis here, but you can see that they intend to dress according to how they read in the scripture that the Prophet and his companions were dressing. They let their beard to grow without trimming, and they shave their mustache. Women often wear the niqab, but not always. It's not always necessary, according to them. The main proponent of this movement in the country is this Society of Revival for Revival of Islamic Heritage, which I just mentioned above. And it is based in Kuwait. And since this organization is active since the mid-1990s, and now it is perhaps the biggest Islamic NGO active in Cambodia, with a massive presence basically everywhere in the country where Muslims can be found. So, okay. Let me show you just a picture how the influx of these foreign Muslim NGOs influenced the Islamic landscape of Cambodia. For example, on this picture, this is not very clear pictures. I just made them with my phone, so you can see a traditional Cambodian mosque. Its shape is influenced by the local architecture. And here, and now most of the mosques looks somehow like this. This is actually a mosque built by a Malaysian charity organization, but you could see that its features are not anymore like this mosque. And for instance, 20 years ago, most of the Cambodian mosques were like this, and especially before the Khmer Rouge, most of them look like this. Now you can see these everywhere. So let me introduce a little bit closer this Society for the Revival of Islamic Heritage in Kuwait. So this organization was established in the beginning of the 1980s, And since then, it became one of the main bankrollers of the Salafi movement worldwide. So they are present in more than 50 countries. In Kuwait, they are not only just a charity, but they are part of a more extended organizational structure, which includes, for example, a student organization and a political party. So what is unique in Kuwait that, unlike other Gulf countries, and especially Saudi, Kuwait has a quasi-constitutional system. So it has a quiet, powerful parliament. The ruler, the emir, still has the last word to say, but the parliament actually can make laws. It is basically one of the most important political institutions. There are every 4 years there are elections in the country, and where political parties, political groups are competing each other. And the parliament is, in a way, the entrance to gain presence in the different institutions of the state, which basically, this means that, for example, if the Salafis get a significant number of members of parliament elected, then they get more jobs, more positions in the state's Islamic institutions or Islamic sector, like the Ministry of Religious Affairs, or the so-called Beit al-Zakat, which is an institution, collects the Zakat religious tax, and it has charity projects abroad and also inside Kuwait. So, and it's going to be important later. So the campaigns for these elections are very important because technically it translates to influence for Islamic movements. It translates to financial capital as well, which they can spend in their transnational activities. So why would an Islamic charity invest huge amount of money in such a country as Cambodia, which someone also can regard it as somewhat marginal, or at least more marginal than, let's say, Malaysia or Indonesia? Well, the reason is that, of course, Cambodia is a quite open country. It takes much less effort to get the necessary permits to start operating as a charity. The government basically welcomes NGOs because it means that these NGOs maintain schools instead of the government, or maintain other welfare institutions. At the same time, successful charity projects boast the legitimacy of the Salafi movement at home in Kuwait, which means that, for instance, I downloaded these pictures. Here, this is an iftar, an opening of the fasting in Ramadan, financed by this organization, and the head of the Southeast Asia Committee of this Salafi charity uploaded this to Twitter. At the same time, they publish several articles, reports in the Kuwaiti dailies about their achievements. And so in short, basically, they also, for instance, just recently built an Islamic hospital in the capital city, Phnom Penh, which is one of the few modern hospitals of the country. So during electoral campaigns, they argue that for the electoral base that, look, we are the ones who support Muslims abroad, vote for us, because then it's going to help us to continue our activities. And at the same time, it has another, like these activities also serve another aim or another importance, which is legitimizing the presence of formal organizations. I mentioned that that Salafis in Kuwait are quite organized. This Salafi charity is part of a more extended Salafi institutional structure. I won't speak too much about this. I met this structure during my fieldwork in Kuwait, and also wrote about it. The thing is that in the Salafi movement, in Salafi thinking, organizing is something suspicious. So most Salafi religious authorities look at establishing political parties, look at establishing charities, or just more tight-knit, controlled, and hierarchical institutional frameworks as something suspicious, something which is not in the text, not in the scripture. For instance, one of the former members of this Salafi organization, who recently split from it, and also quite weakened it because of this split, argued that the Prophet and the companions of the Prophet, when Islam just was confined in the Arabian Peninsula and they were spreading the new religion, despite being able to organize themselves, they never did it, and precisely because this is something against the teaching of the Quran and later the prophetic tradition. But with the so-called successful charity projects in Cambodia, for instance, Salafis argue that, look, we could achieve all of this, and we could help these Muslims. Also, we could show them the real pure Islam due to our organization, because we wouldn't be so effective if we wouldn't possess this charity. We wouldn't be like organized. So let's talk a little bit about what Salafis have in Cambodia. First, they established an impressive network of schools. They have two secondary schools, one in Phnom Penh, one in Tebung Mum province, a little bit to the north east of Phnom Penh. The one in Phnom Penh is only for boys, and the other one only for women. And they have a large network of about 30 elementary schools, boarding schools. And well, I made this picture in the south, in Kampot province. So you see that these boarding schools include, usually in the center, a mosque, a football field, and those buildings which give place to the classrooms and the offices of the teachers. These institutions are quite attractive to Cambodian Muslims because they don't teach only religious subjects, but also teach the regular Cambodian curriculum, which differs from, let's say, the schools of the mostly Malaysia-supported Tabligh, which only teach religious subjects. So it means that if you graduate from these schools, you will be well versed in religion, but at the same time you could go to one of the Cambodian universities, or even universities in Thailand, or even to the West, because they learn how to speak in Arabic in these schools, and at the same time they also learn English. So if you are a graduate of this school network, basically you have a a somewhat useful English knowledge which you can rely on when prepared for getting a foreign, let's say, Western scholarship. Well, this school network itself makes Salafism attractive, as many of the Cambodian Muslims link Salafism to social progress, to education. At the same time, this charity organization has a so-called Kafala Du'at program, which translates to sponsoring preachers. This means that they finance a few hundred of preachers, missionaries in the rural Cambodia, in the countryside. These preachers usually get a mosque, some salary, and in exchange they have to spread the religion, hold religious classes, teach within in these Muslim villages. They also, they are the ones who select those students who can go and study in Saudi Arabia, in the Islamic University of Medina. And at the same time, this Kuwaiti charity established a good relationship with the ruling party of Cambodia. This is the CPP, Cambodian People's Party. They usually finance the campaign of CPP in the Muslim areas, and in exchange, CPP grants them protection, autonomy, so they can freely proselytize among the Muslims, strictly among the Muslims and not the Buddhists. At the same time, the government protects the Salafis from other Muslim officials, politicians who are hostile to this movement. And so what is the impact of this charity organization in Cambodia? One of the most important is that a kind of Arab-oriented Muslim milieu emerged. So traditionally, Cambodian Muslims are influenced by the Malay word. The traditional, traditionally the language of religious instruction is Malay in Cambodia. But now you have a significant number of Muslims who don't learn anymore Malay, but use Arabic as the main mediator of religious knowledge. The Salafi movement also became one of the dominant movements in Cambodia. The other dominant movement is actually the above-mentioned Tabligh. And it also created, of course, sharp intra-Muslim division. This, in the early 2000s, went even until violent confrontation between Salafis and members of the Tabligh. But at the same time, the school network of the Kuwaiti charity led to the increase of the university graduates among the Cambodian Muslims. And I will stop here. I think also my time is up. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
So it's very eye-opening for me because I know very little about the Muslims in Cambodia. Mm-hmm. I just wonder, from all that talk, what is the status of the Chambani minority? Do you know? Or?
Yeah, the Chambani, they're also recognized by the state as a religious community. They also have a separate institutional structure. They have they also have a mufti. So the Sunnis have a mufti who's a state official and an official in the Ministry of Religious Affairs. And the Chambani also has one mufti. And the thing is that their number has decreased quite sharply. But well, now it's at least so their number is stagnating. It's not decreasing anymore due to this state recognition, and there are some people who are actually willing to nurture their traditions, their culture.
Where is their mufti from?
I don't know. It's one of the Chambani villages. I don't know actually exactly which one.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious because I have a student who's doing Boyanese community, the community from Boyan Island in Indonesia. Mm-hmm. So he wants to do his research in Cambodia because there's a big migration there.
You mean from Indonesia?
From Indonesia.
To Cambodia.
To Cambodia.
This is very interesting.
Yes.
I mean,
I'll
so
have a conversation with you afterwards.
Yeah. Let's speak about this. This is very interesting for me.
Yeah.
So
I'll open it to other people. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Thank you for your talk. I was wondering, because you were mentioning a lot about Middle East links and how it influenced Southeast Asian Islam. I was wondering if there was a reverse, especially since Southeast Asian Islam has been quite established in Indonesia and Malaysia, does it actually influence anything in the
Okay, so well, I mean, Southeast Asian Islamic ideas actually don't penetrate the Islamic scene in the Middle East. So it's usually very much a one-directional flow. But I mean, so in certain ways, yes, especially Malaysia does influence Middle Eastern Islam, because Malaysia is a kind of hub for religious media. So let's say, well, you have Peace TV, which is not Malaysian TV, but you have a number of Malaysian preachers, like Hussein Yi, or who's the other one? Forgot his name, Noreddin, employed by this channel, and it is also watched by especially those who can speak English in the Gulf countries. At the same time, so the Malaysian media infrastructure provides a kind of platform for those for thinkers from the Middle East who otherwise couldn't really present their ideas freely, such as Salman al-Auda, the Saudi ex-leader of the Sahwa insurgents in the 1990s. So in an indirect way, yes, but I mean, I haven't really heard Malaysian or Indonesian intellectuals having huge popularity in the Middle East. I don't know if you have come across actually anything. Just let me know. It's Anyone else? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So, what does all this modern, this influx of modern Islamic, like Muslim Brotherhood and Salafism hold for Southeast Asia? Is it create more propensity for conflicts within the Muslim factions?
Well, I mean, it's like, I cannot give you like a clear-cut answer to this. I mean, I think that, like the potentials of conflict exist because of the local socio-political context. I would say that foreign ideologies or the influx of Salafism, I mean, that's a bad word of foreign because it's but like the influx of Salafism or other Muslim movements, I mean, they might give a kind of justification to discontent or insurgency, etc. But I don't think that they are the cause of the conflict. They might just, as I told, give the legitimation or the ideological background for social movements. So I don't think so. So in short, I mean, I don't think that the ongoing conflicts would not exist if Salafism, let's say, or Muslim Brotherhood wouldn't be there. So that's it. Yes.
Hi, I'd like to ask about. I mean, recently there's been almost a romanticization of Sufi Muslims.
Yes.
And then there's also the vilification of Salafis. Do you think that that's a helpful binary framework? I ask this question because within counterterrorism literature and scholarship, right, there's been calls to distinguish Salafis, as in instead of lumping them into an entire group of potential terrorism, right? It'd be useful to distinguish the moderates or the ones who are less inclined to violence. So.
I mean, no. I think, and actually, there's a literature of this kind of moderate and radical division because no, I mean, you can see many Salafis who are peaceful, teaching peacefully, and they are not involved in any kind of conflict. While at the same time, you could see that Sufis could be just as violent as peace-loving and quietist. So, good example is a few years ago there was a kind of anti-Shia, quite violent campaign in the island of Madura, and it was launched by people who belong to the NU, Nahdlatul Ulama, which is like a traditionalist organization with also inclination towards Sufism. So I don't think that like, again, where do you actually draw the line between moderate and radical, and in what context? So I don't think, again, I don't think that this is very helpful to look at Salafis as as like a category of radical Muslims, because this is not true. Some Salafis could be radical and can actually get inspiration from the Salafi way of thinking, Salafi interpretation of the text, but the opposite can be true as well. So I don't think that this kind of I think from my perspective, simplistic approach would be helpful. I don't think so.
I don't know whether I haven't heard anything about Philippines.
Because I had 45 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, are there any examples of the Gulf connections in the Philippines, in the Mindanao?
Okay, so, all right. Yes, actually, so Philippines is a kind of blank spot in our research, to be honest. So I'm currently editing a book about Salafism in Southeast Asia, and I constantly have been trying to find someone who could talk more about these Gulf influences and the growth of Salafism in the Philippines. What I know is that yes, they exist. There are Filipinos who studied in Medina, or who just became influenced by Salafism through the internet. And there is a Salafi movement, or at least a Salafi kind of influence in the Muslim communities of the Philippines. But I cannot tell you more because this is something I'm trying to find out more about, but no success so far. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I just wanted to ask, like, how do the Islamic Southeast Asian states like Malaysia and Indonesia, how do they view or manage like this influx of like
this increasing, I guess you can say, religious fundamentalism from the Middle East? Like, do they see it as a threat, and how do they seek to respond or manage it in their own states, as well as even in like influence in their own, like in the region itself, in other countries like in Cambodia? Yeah.
Well, this is a very broad subject
Yeah.
to talk about. But so in short, both Indonesia and Malaysia, in a way, well, don't like the word actually religious fundamentalism, but the thing is that in the beginning, in like the 1970s, 1990s, at least the Cambodian, Malaysian and Indonesian governments were not blocking the influx of these influences. I mean, even, for example, Malaysian government-linked institutions and groups received funding from Saudi Arabia. At the same time, so let's say there is one of the most important Malaysian Muslim movements, the movement of Anwar Ibrahim, ABIM. So now it's more inclined towards kind of liberal Islam, but before it was closer to the Muslim Brotherhood. And they also received quite a significant Gulf funding. For example, a large part of the funds which were used to establish the Islamic University of Malaysia went through ABIM. I mean, Anwar Ibrahim was, I think, at one point the Asian representatives of the World Muslim Youth, which is a branch of the International Islamic Relief Organization of Saudi Arabia. So after 9/11, some restrictions were imposed, especially due to Western pressure. And certain charity organizations were banned. But I mean, there is if you look at Indonesia now, there is like an administrative pressure on Gulf charities, and in Malaysia, the Malaysian government, for example, doesn't really like the Salafis and neither the Muslim Brothers. So the Malaysian religious establishment is trying to push out Salafism from the country, and the government supports the more traditional Shafi'i Islamic discourse. But I mean, so it's like I don't think that like there is a campaign existing to block the influence of the Gulf. So Gulf charities are still quite active in Indonesia and not in Malaysia. So I know that I mean, they told me, their representatives, when I traveled there and interviewed them, that there is a pressure by the government, and they have to be careful, and certain projects are not encouraged. But I mean, they are still relatively free to operate. I mean, again, I don't want to actually now go into counterterrorism and etc., because this is a huge subject. You can read books about it. So, more questions? No one? Yes.
Hi, this is not exactly a question, more like your comment on it. So I think recently there's been almost like an Arabization of Malay Muslims in Singapore.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So for example, I think the last fasting month, there was a small hoo-ha where a few Malay Muslims did not like that Malays were using non-Islamic terms to describe fasting or to describe the rituals around fasting.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so for example, instead of saying buka puasa, which is in Malay is breaking fast, you should say iftar, which is Arabic.
That's strange, actually, because even Salafis in Indonesia use buka puasa. So or like the ones in Cambodia who I talked to in Malay, they use buka puasa. It's like, okay, all right.
So this Arabization comes at the expense of Malay heritage, Malay cultures, and whatever the diversity and plurality within those cultures are. Could you maybe talk about that issue, whether Malay Muslims should be pursuing this Arab route?
Okay, so who's the source of this kind of Arabizations? Is it like coming just from the society itself, or MUIS, or
So far, I think MUIS is trying to counter it.
Okay.
Yeah, so the source tends to be, I think, external preachers, usually from the internet. So, for example, within, let's say, my family WhatsApp group, you see a lot of aunties and makciks and my grandmothers all, sharing posts about, foreign Islamic scholars who, in my opinion, don't really make that much sense. But it seems to have like a huge influence, particularly within informal religious classes. I'm not sure if you know this, but I think a lot of Malay, Muslim, probably middle-aged or older ladies, they have all these religious classes where they go and attend and learn about religious knowledge. Sometimes I think some of the knowledge can be somewhat dubious. Yeah. So I think there's this discernible trend of the Malays getting Arabized, or they're trying to emulate the Arabs.
Who actually hold these informal halakat or religious classes?
I think sometimes it's just, ustads.
But ustads, like...
But not exactly, I don't think they're regulated by MUIS or what, more like self-styled.
Okay. Can you link them to any tradition or any movement or school?
I think it definitely, they lean towards the more conservative style. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
so
perhaps Wahhabism,
I see.
Salafism.
I see. Okay. No, it's a new thing to me as well. I mean, I'm not an expert on Singaporean Islam, so it's interesting. Okay, thanks for your presence.